If you use the waiver wire in fantasy football, your chances of winning a league go up by a mile, but you have to do it the right way and add the right players. This video is going to go over all of the must-have players coming into week 3 to make sure you are set up for success, and some defenses at the end, so make sure to stick around for that. And we'll cover the bases here. Number 1 priority ads. You're going to get Keenan Allen. You're going to get Bashaw Tutin. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt as well, because Austin Eckler is out for the rest of the year with an injury. Zach Ertz also gets a boost because of that. Juwan Johnson looking like the tight end 1. As long as we don't have Taysom Hill and Foster Moreau in this offense, when they come off PUP, it's a different situation. Harold Fannin as well. Trey Benson is looking like he's getting a ton of usage. If you guys want a breakdown of that, I just put a YouTube video on breaking down every single backfield from what we just saw in week 2. Brenton Strange as well didn't have a great game. I talk about him in that video. Quinshon Judkins, Drake May, and Cam Scatterbo. Those are all the number 1 top priority guys, but here is the waiver wire ads you need to make, starting with Cedric Tillman. He's rostered in less than 40% of leagues still, which I don't understand. Make it simple. Joe Flacco, when he's starting, passes a ton. Cedric Tillman is going to be a beneficiary of that. You look at his stats with Jameis Winston last season. You can compare these two quarterbacks because they are both top 5 in passing attempts when they are healthy and starting. He averaged 18.6 fantasy points per game and played over 90% of the snaps, averaging 10 targets per game with Winston last year. That was not an accident. Last week, he leads all wide receivers, yes, over Jerry Jeudy in snaps, 69 compared to Judy's 64. Even in routes run, 48 compared to Judy's 45. Now, it is marginal, but he is on the field as the number 1 wide receiver of sorts, leading him to finish with 10.2 fantasy football points in a terrible-looking blowout against the Ravens. Now, his fantasy day did get saved by a touchdown. It's not all good things and rainbows, but you cannot ignore the underlying numbers from what he saw, and he's actually being used. Flacco, as a starter for this team, has them clearly in the driver's seat of number 1 in the NFL for total pass volume. That's not going to change, which is positive for all of these wide receivers, and why Cedric Tillman is a must-add as long as Flacco is the starting quarterback. That might change sooner rather than later, but for now, he is a guy we want. But please put a waiver claim on Alec Ayomenor. He was in our must stash video last week, so make sure to be subscribed to this channel. Possibly like the video if you like this one, but we're a week early on all of these players. That video always does amazing. You do not want to miss out on him on the waiver wire this week. Probably my number 1 ad. In week 1, he starts out strong. His first ever game as a rookie sees 79% of the snaps, being top 2 in targets and routes. Then last week in week 2 here, we see it's not a fluke. He comes out and plays 48 of the total 66 snaps. His second ever game is getting a ton of usage in them, and he's clearly second on the team behind only Calvin Ridley, leading him to finish with a higher total target share per route run than Ridley did. He's clearly ahead of Tyler Lockett, DK, Justin Jefferson, and even everybody else on this wide receiver depth chart, and you can tell just by watching these games, Cam Ward is really building a real connection with him. Last week, I know you saw Cam Ward roll out of the pocket, throw a touchdown pass completely across his body. That is the number 1 thing coaches tell quarterbacks not to do, and he did it. I don't know why he's looking across the field for him there, but it's a good sign that they want to use him. And now they're coming into a matchup here against the Colts, who just allowed 41.1 total points to the Broncos wide receivers out of all people. Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin, Cortland Sutton. And speaking of that, Troy Franklin is a guy we need to be adding off of our waiver wire. This is a great one for the wide receivers this week, and we'll get it out clearly. 24 fantasy points is great in week 2. Yes, it's amazing, but if you're on this channel and you've seen these videos before, it's more about the underlying numbers and not just the fantasy points scored. If you guys want real data every single week for waiver wire, start sits, everything else, please be subscribed to this channel. I would appreciate you dropping a like. It helps my channel out and me as a human a lot, but also you're getting free value from these videos. But this guy led all of the wide receivers in snaps, playing 44 of the 45 total snaps in 3 wide receiver sets, and even 5 of the 6 snaps in 2 wide receiver sets. It is clear that he and Cortland Sutton are the number 1 and number 2. Now, Sutton didn't have a great game, but he never came off the field unless it was a 1 wide receiver set, which obviously Cortland Sutton was the 1 for because he's the vet. You're not going to take him off the field for a second game ever rookie, but he led all the team in routes. He led all the wide receivers in targets with 9 and a 32.1% team target share. To put that into perspective, Malik Neighbors averaged 35.3% of a target share all throughout the season, and he was clearly the number 1 wide receiver in that. It's not going to continue. Like, he's not going to see a 32% target share every single week, but it's definitely a sign to show us that it's not a fluke, because this team literally traded a second-year wide receiver in Devon Vele to the Saints earlier this season to make room in the slot for Troy Franklin, and that is exactly what we've seen. He just showed us in week 1 and week 2. He's the clear number 2 wide receiver in 3 wide receiver sets, 2 wide receiver sets. He's always on the field, is what I'm trying to say. And Bo Nix even played with him at college in Oregon and gave him 2 years, 2,000 yards in that total season. So it's good. Troy Franklin is a guy we need to add. For the same reason everybody else is hyping up Garrett Wilson and Justin Fields for their college connection, we can do the same thing here. And unfortunately, it is probably okay to drop Marvin Mims, seeing a fraction of the field time compared to Sutton and Franklin. He's going to be more of a boom bust player. He's great down the field. He needs to be in the offense for like NFL perspective, but for fantasy football, he might be hard to trust. So if you need to make room for him, that's understandable. But I can't believe we're saying this. Wan'Dale Robinson is a guy that we need to add, and we just have to be aware, first of all, of the situation we're getting ourselves into. 28.2 fantasy points against the Cowboys, caught 8 of his 10 targets, 142 total yards and a touchdown. That's awesome. Again, on this channel, we look into the numbers, and what we do have to be is realistic. This game went into overtime. Russell Wilson had 41 passing attempts. He looked amazing at times. That won't always happen. The pass volume is not always going to be that high. The Giants, however, are always going to be in negative game scripts. If you look at their upcoming schedule, they get the Chiefs next week, then the Chargers, the Colts, the Eagles, the Broncos, the Eagles. Again, I can keep going on. Like, there's a real possibility they just do not win any games for the first 2 months of the season, so they'll have to keep passing. If we break this down, if we look deeper into the snaps and the real numbers we want, it's possible that we could see this trending upwards. 47 of the total 66 snaps for Wan'Dale Robinson. He did come off in 2 wide receiver sets. Darius Slayton was seeing more snaps than him, along with Malik Neighbors, obviously, which isn't really a good sign. But I attribute him seeing less snaps this week than in week 1 to the injury. He was questionable coming into this week, so that's probably why he was on the field less. Even though he was the wide receiver 3 in snap share and time on field, he was still second on the team in routes run. And the fact, again, that Darius Slayton over here is running 100% of the routes and only got 2 targets, that's horrid. Like, that is really, really bad. But Wan'Dale has been in and out of the waiver wire videos on this channel for a while. And it's understandable because his wide receiver role is going to get a bunch of targets. He's always been the low ADOT, the high target kind of guy. He was the wide receiver 8 in slot rate last year. Not necessarily a bad thing, though. But when you look at last year, he was the wide receiver 19 in targets at 8.1 per game. That's pretty good. Wide receiver 6 in slot rate. But he only finished as the wide receiver 36. So it's a low ceiling kind of role that he plays in this offense. But what negates all of this and why I want to stash him in fantasy football is because they actually used him outside the slot and in deep routes, which again, we can see from his touchdowns, he really just had a go route and caught a nice ball off of it. He had 14.2 yards per target last week, ran a way higher percentage of deep routes, which is good for him. I think he can do it. I've always wanted the play type of a Wan'Dale Robinson and a Kadarius Toney to succeed in the NFL and fantasy football, it's at least because they're really fun to watch. It looks like this might be a trend in the right direction. Will Russell Wilson be passing 450 yards every single game? No. But with the rest of these wide receivers not making a name for themselves in this offense, I could see him being viable for us as a floor kind of guy. But a plug-and-play running back that you might want to get, and before I get too deep into Ramondre Stevenson, there is not a lot of running backs on the waiver wire. It is a very, very big drought of those right now. So if you want to have one, just hold on to somebody. Ramondre is that guy. And we take a deeper dive into this backfield. Ramondre Stevenson is the clear primary running back. 39 snaps compared to Henderson at 19 and Gibson at 10, and dominating in carries, leading the team in routes run with 16 compared to Henderson at 11. This isn't a panic situation on Trevion Henderson. Very quickly, I talked about it again in the week 2 recap video. Rookies typically start slow. We kind of expected this to happen for Trevion because of that fact. But this is the second straight week that Ramondre Stevenson has led this running back group in time on field and usage. Ramondre and Henderson split 50-50 at the goal line last week, but 4 of the 5 short yardage snaps went to Ramondre with a majority of the total plays as well. Trevion cannot be started until we see something else change. In week 3, the Patriots do get the Steelers, who they have been struggling to stop running backs. They let Breece Hall go for 16.5 fantasy points and 107 yards in week 1. Last week, they just let Ken Walker go for 18.8 fantasy points and 105 yards on the ground. Maybe Ramondre Stevenson is a plug-and-play start here. It's not a confident one, but he is the RB1 right now, and if they're just going to ride the hot hand of him, I don't expect Trevion Henderson to be a start for us in fantasy football anytime soon until we see that change. A guy that plays on Monday that we probably need to be adding even before this game, after this game, whatever it looks like, is going to be Dalton Schultz. The bottom line here is that he is the tight end 1 for this offense, with Cade Stover now not playing with a foot injury. CJ Stroud targeted the tight ends in week 1 on 33% of his dropbacks. Now all of that target share goes to just him because there's nobody else that runs routes at the tight end position besides him and Cade Stover. We've seen Dalton Schultz be viable in fantasy football before when given the chance. With this offensive line being really, really bad, and with the running game being really bad, the intermediate to short game really has no choice but to thrive, which is where the tight end safety blanket valve comes from for fantasy football. Again, we'll see what he does right now against the Buccaneers defense. I expect him to dominate in routes run. I think he should get the ball a good amount too, because if you lock up Nico Collins, what else do you really have with Christian Kirk being injured? But that is a guy that I'm willing to stash. But a few defenses here that you've been waiting for in this video that we need to pick up off waivers. I'll save the number one at the end. The Falcons. They get a matchup versus the Carolina Panthers. We know Bryce Young has been struggling and turning the ball over a decent amount. He's passing a ton, but he has no choice but to do that. The Falcons, on the other hand, just held J.J. McCarthy, Justin Jefferson, Aaron Jones, everybody on this offense to 6 points. That was terrible. The Falcons defense invested in that in the draft for a reason. This team is good on defense, and I think they showed a lot of promise in that matchup. They should be able to take advantage of the Carolina Panthers. And when you look at the Buccaneers, they now get a matchup in week 3 versus the Fieldsless Jets. He's in concussion protocol. If he doesn't play, the Buccaneers is a defense that I absolutely love grabbing off the waiver wire. The Commanders versus the Raiders is another decent one. The Commanders defense hasn't been looking amazing with Marshawn Lattimore. Trust me, I am a Commanders fan. Trey Amos is looking okay. And guys, I do have a full defensive ranking video coming out every single week. So make sure you guys have your post notifications on and just don't miss that, because I post it right before the games start. The Packers, though. How are the Packers available in over 50% of leagues on the waiver wire? They get a matchup versus the Browns in week 3. This should not be possible. Please go get them. But that is going to finish out this video, guys. I will have my deep stash video coming later this week in a few days. That has some really, really good ones. We just had guys like Alec Iomanor on this video now, so you want to be ahead of that. So thank you guys for watching this one. All glory to the man above, and I will see you in those coming soon.